Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to go over the concept of what is object-oriented programming. And to first understand that, I think we kind of need to start with talking about procedural-based programming. So basically there's um, two main concepts of programming that most of us work in right now, and that is procedural programming and object-oriented programming. And so far, if you've gone through my videos and you've done everything, I've mainly been programming in what is called procedural based programming. What procedural based programming is data is separated basically uh, by functions. Everything we've done in function orientation. Uh, the code is broken down into chunks of like one functionality, like one thing that you want to do something to the code and you output that data. And it kind of flows in a kind of process. This works really well for small little programs, and most of the things that we've been doing so far has worked well in that. But if you've heard of anything called spaghetti code, the problem becomes an issue, or procedural programming becomes an issue when you start going into larger projects, right? That's part of the reason why we started breaking things up into having separate files for different functions, because if you try to have them all in one big file, it's a lot of scrolling and trying to find what you want it to do. So having separate files for each one of those helps the organizational of it, right? So that is what procedural based programming is. And the problem with it is the more functions you add, the more files you add, the harder it is to find out like what goes with where what functions modify what data. If you want to change something, you could change something and then end up changing or affecting something else because of that change. So that comes to the object oriented part of programming. Object oriented was designed so that instead of having it be you have the data and you send it to these individual functions, now you have everything bundled up in one big thing that they call an object. And so you have all of your data and your functions built together. So then as you expand, you would just, your functions and everything are still grouped up. So you know what everything belongs to each other. And so since it's easily referenced and easily, you can tell, oh, this function is part of this class. And so objects are built more repeatable so that you could, if you want to change it and make a modification, you could make a child of that, or you could have other parts of it or add a function to it, and that function isn't going to necessarily affect something else because it only affects that certain class. Um, so theoretically, it's supposed to make it less messy, more self-contained. There's four basic pillars of object-oriented programming, and those four basic pillars are encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. Now, we've already talked about encapsulation because that is basically the process of building a class, right? We built a class and it had, right, encapsulation had this where you had your class set up and then you had private members and public members and you had your setters and your getters. So you had all your data in it, right? So that's encapsulation. That is the process of building and putting it all together and making one big object with your thing. Inheritance is that you're going to take that one object and you could have children of it that are going to slightly change stuff. And I will go in a future video, I'll go into more about inheritance and how all that works. And then polymorphism is that you could have one main superclass and have variations of that. And so that would be kind of like you could have a superclass called pets, right? And you would have, dogs and cats and lizards and birds they're all different types of pets that you could have, right? But they all have very different attributes that would go along with each one of them. So that's polymorphism, is that you'd have a superclass and you'd have, they'd have some similar traits that overlap, but a lot of it is going to be different. And then abstraction kind of goes back to the encapsulation part, where it is, instead of being exactly what you're hiding, it's what is shown to the user. So, right, we're hiding data from the user with the private methods and private attributes in when we do encapsulation. And what we're showing to the users, and the reason why we're deciding what we're showing to the users, is what is called abstraction. So that's kind of the basics of it, right? The 4 pillars of object-oriented programming. And in future videos, I'm going to go through what each one of these are in more detail.